Welcome to another edition of Consider This from Brock University. My name is Mike Saunders, and once again, I will be your host and moderator for today's discussion, entitled Aging Well in Niagara, a conversation about the needs of seniors. According to a recent Niagara Region report, over the next 15 years, more than half of Niagara's population growth will come from people aged 65 years and older. Stop and think about that for a moment. Now, this is due to an aging baby boomer population and older adults moving to Niagara to retire here. The report notes Niagara must be prepared to meet the needs of an aging population. But are we? The region is joined in a global effort led by the World Health Organization to become an age-friendly community. The idea is to create safe and secure environments that foster community participation, personal health, and well-being. Joining us to share their thoughts are Paula Gardner, Assistant Professor in the Department of Health Sciences, Lynn McCleary, Associate Professor in the Department of Nursing, and Kimberly Gammage, Associate Professor in the Department of Kinesiology. And I say welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Hi.
Let's start off by going around the table, and each of you can summarize your research in the area of older adults and a description of what, from your standpoint through your research, perhaps an age-friendly environment really is. And let's begin with Paula.
So I'm a community-based researcher, which basically means that in the work that I do, I partner with community organizations and I conduct research that's by, for, and within the community. So that means that my unit of analysis, the place where I look particularly carefully, is not necessarily with the individual, but more from the neighborhood level. My research has been for the past few years in the area of age-friendly communities. And what we do when we do that kind of work is we're looking at examining neighborhoods, all aspects of neighborhoods though, not just healthcare and social services, but we look across sectors, so housing and transportation and public places. And really what we're trying to do is, first of all, try and understand and appreciate and protect and learn from what's working already in a community so we can build from that. What aspects of a neighborhood are already age-friendly? The second thing that we try and do is highlight what's not working, so areas for improvement in all of those sectors. And then lastly, to identify opportunities for change. The goal of the work generally is to work collaboratively with communities and residents to improve the age-friendliness of neighborhoods. Because to my mind, and I think most people who work in this area, an age-friendly neighborhood is just a friendly neighborhood where we'd all like to live, work, and play.
Okay, now to Lynn.
Well, my work isn't as directly related to the communities, but I think that it will contribute to age-friendly services. I have two areas that I do my research in. One is probably more to do with knowledge translation or getting research into practice. And what I've been focusing on lately is trying to help educators make sure that the students that graduate from their programs are knowledgeable about normal aging and then problems that are associated with aging. And I've been focusing most on healthcare professionals, but I think that there's application to other people that work in business or work in the community. So I think from that work that it's quite important that we have a workforce that is knowledgeable about the needs of older adults in our community and able to not treat older adults as just older versions of adults, just as we wouldn't treat children as miniature adults. So that's one thing that I think is important. And then the other area that I do work in has to do with dementia services and transitions in dementia services in particular. So I do think that we have room for improvement in dementia services in our community. And I think that's quite important, but in terms of how many people with dementia there are in the community, that's a small proportion of the older adults. They have significant needs, people with dementia and their families, but most older adults are healthy.
Okay, and to Kimberly.
Well, my research focuses on, I'm an exercise psychologist by training, so I'm particularly interested in looking at exercise in older adults, and sort of from two perspectives. The first is how we can structure exercise environments to encourage older adults to exercise and to stay active. And then from the second perspective, it's looking at some of the psychological benefits that older adults may accrue from being active out in the community, working out with other people. So that's kind of the research end of things. I'm also the director of the Senior Fit program at the Brock-Niagara Centre for Health and Wellbeing. And so we run an exercise program specifically geared towards older adults. A lot of the seniors that are members of our program certainly benefit from the exercise programs. The other end of that that's important is we have a lot of our students from the Department of Kinesiology who work at this center supervising the exercise programs. So we're also interested in looking not just at the benefits that the older adults get from being active, but we're also looking at what the students gain from working with this population and the interactions between the two. And I think that's kind of really where my interest is starting to lean in talking to the students working there and talking to the seniors that are members at the gym. There really is, they both gain so much from working with others, from each other, and from interacting with one another, and I think it's so important. I think that's probably a lot what Paula and Lynn are both, I think, going to say too in their different areas.
Okay, so let's open the floor to the discussion at hand on aging well in Niagara. And I'll put the question to you to start the discussion. Are we doing enough here in Niagara to prepare for this so-called aging boom in Niagara? And if we're not, what should we be doing?
There's some good options out there for people. I was actually at a Falls Prevention Network meeting yesterday, and I was surprised at the number of physical activity options that there were for seniors in the Niagara region. Now, I say I was surprised because they talked about 6 or 7 different options, and I was surprised that there was that many. But certainly, if we think about the way the population in Niagara is moving, that's not going to be enough. But it's at least a good start. I guess what worried me a little was that I was unaware of most of the programs that were out there, and I think that may be one of the problems in Niagara, at least in terms of physical activity, and I would assume probably with a lot of different aspects of life, that people just aren't aware of where these services are or what services are available for them. And so, we need to offer more things, but we also need to make people aware of what's already out there and available for them.
Yeah. So one of the that's an excellent point, Kim, and I think that one of the aspects that I was talking about, or the domains of an age-friendly neighborhood or community, is communication and information. That's critical, and I think we are doing some amazing things in this area already, and there's promise and potential for moving forward. However, I do think I would agree with you that we need to make sure that what is available is known among our senior population.
In terms of how we're doing and where we need to go, of course, every community, as Paula said, there's always room for improvement and there's always problems. I sit on a committee that is, I think they're called a visioning committee for the age-friendly strategy here in Niagara, and there are representatives from seniors groups that are part of that for the different municipalities in the region. And I'd say in terms of having an older age council that makes recommendations or advises the mayors and councils of our municipalities, and older adults giving advice to the municipal government, we're sort of spotty in that. So there's some areas of our region where that's working really well, and then there's some areas of our region where it's more challenging. But it does seem to me that with this work, there is a gradual uptake and recognition by politicians who represent us, that this is important and that we need to do it, not just the health, but if you want your businesses to be successful, if you want you want to have a tax base, then you have to make it a place where older people can live.
And I think the boomers, they've changed things across the history, and they are not going to just sit down and it's not going to be the status quo. They don't want to go to senior centers because they're for old people, and they don't want to do fitness programs the same way. They're just going to reinvent everything, and I think that's exciting.
It's funny when you say that, because if I look at the program that we run, I always, when I started the program, I was looking at what was available for exercise for seniors, and I would go to fitness conferences, and they'd have sessions that were fitness for seniors, and I'd go to them, and it was people sitting in chairs, and maybe there was a little, like a stretchy band, maybe if you really wanted to be daring and I look at that kind of stereotype of that we have of aging, and then I look at the members at the center, and there's not, you would hardly know that there was any similarity between them. And I think they do have, there are some certain needs and things that you have to address for them specifically, but to me the biggest thing is that they're people just like everybody else, and they don't need lots of, for the most part, they don't need lots of special accommodations, and they don't want lots of special accommodations. They want to be treated with respect, but they want to be treated like everyone else. I mean, you say, an age-friendly community is just a friendly community. I think that's absolutely true. That's what they're looking for.
Right. And an age-friendly gym is just
Yes.
is just a friendly
Yeah.
gym, right? Where
Yeah.
everyone feels included.
Yes. And it's funny because I look at our facility, and they enjoy exercising with people their own age, because a gym, any type of gym, can be an intimidating environment for anyone. And a lot of people in this cohort haven't necessarily grown up going to gyms and exercising in a more structured setting. So they're very comfortable exercising, with their peers. But a really important part for them is the students that are involved in having those intergenerational relationships, and they love the interactions with the students because they find them exciting and interesting, and there's certainly interests that overlap, but they introduce them to new ideas and new activities, and it just brings a whole new dimension to what we're doing there. So.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking about a project that some of my first year students did last year, where they just did some research about elder speak, which is when you talk to older adults, kind of using baby talk or disrespectfully, as if they need more help, not like an adult. And this was, news to my first year students, although they were definitely wanting to be respectful, but the idea that that this was happening to the extent that it does was a bit new to them, and then that there's education programs to try to help our health professionals not to do this. And one of the students, she told me about going out for lunch with some older relatives and their friends, and asking them about this project and what she was learning, and they all had these stories about how they had been called honey or sweetie, and how they're treated in stores, and so there are still places where it isn't friendly, and I find that interesting. I find that really interesting. So your students are learning just to be with people and not treat people as if they're disabled just because they're old.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's funny when you say that, because when we moved down to the center, we had been up on main campus, and we moved down and integrated with a couple of other programs down there, and they were very much, they called all the members patients, and it used to drive me absolutely crazy, because I would say, they're seniors, they're not sick, there's lots of people have different chronic health conditions, but they don't dwell on them, they're just like everyone else, and it took so long to get out of that culture of calling them patients, and just saying they're members. If they were at the zone or they were at the Y, we wouldn't be calling them patients there, and so there's no reason we should be calling them here. And it's interesting to watch the students and their perspectives change over the course of the semester in working with them, because I think it's a very eye-opening experience for them, because they all come in with such stereotypes about what it's going to be like. They think they're going to break people when they go in, or they think that they're very limited in how much they can learn and how much they can grow and improve, and then they realize rather quickly that every stereotype they had is just out the window.
And that ageism, those stereotypes go both ways. Because
Yes.
in my experience with my students who also go out into the community and spend time interviewing seniors, they have much more in common than what's different between them. And one of the things that's common is they're kind of almost afraid of each other in a way. You know, like my students would say, I'm kind of afraid to go into a senior's home and interview them. Meanwhile, the seniors are saying, I'm kind of afraid to let some students in my house and interview me. But of course, it's just because our society is so age segregated.
Yeah.
And we continue to, more so now than in the past, and we've really, there's certain spaces that are for seniors and certain that are for schools that are for younger people, etc. And I think we've all we're talking really about social aspects, and we spend a lot of time thinking about physical health and a lot of time even thinking about physical environment, but it's that social piece that we all, I think, recognize as critical and often gets neglected, but it can be so powerful.
I've heard about your, what do you call it?
Senior fit.
The senior
Yeah.
fit. I've heard about it because I play bridge, and in my bridge group, most of the women are quite a bit older than
Yeah.
me in the two groups that I'm in. And I can't remember which group, but I know that in one of the groups I've heard them talking about going there, and that they, it's friends that they have there, and that it's, comfortable for them compared to some other places. And I feel like in the future, like all kinds of social things will have to change in some way, so that, clubs where people already are will adapt to the aging membership in that club, or churches will adapt to the aging membership or dwindling membership maybe. And so one of the activities that I've done is curling. And so one of my friends was telling me about her teammate who's 90 and is skipping a team in curling, and is able to do that because now they have an adaptation where there's this stick. Instead of having to crouch down, you can use this stick, and where there's a little bit of, well, maybe we might be concerned, but anyway, you can take risks too when you're older too, and then you still, it's your choice if you want to do a risky exercise, or if you want to go on a risky vacation or something.
I think that's huge. We have a big balance component, and so we use all kinds of equipment, and it's, the kids are, well, not just the kids, but the members and the kids come in and they kind of look at it in their first, and they think there's no way any senior would be able to do that. And the seniors come in and they say, oh, I'm never going to be able to do that. I'm too scared, or I'm not fit enough, or it's just not for me. I've never been that much of a risk taker. And when you watch the kids work with them on those activities, and that, when you said it's their right to take a risk, and I mean, they've lived 90 years and they've got, or however many years of experience down there, and to treat them like they're incompetent or they have to be walking around on eggshells all the time is, I think a lot of people find it insulting almost, because it's kind of discounting all their knowledge and experience that they've had for all of these years.
Yeah, risk, I think, is a huge one, and I think there's a lot of, we need to kind of unpack or dispel a lot of the issues that come up around risk. I mean, in ways, in hospitals where I've worked before, in rehab hospitals, it's safe, we try and keep people in their rooms and in their beds and not moving around too much because we can track them and they're, quote, safe. And I think families sometimes in some of the interviews I've done with community members, they'll say, oh, let's go out and do this, but don't tell my daughter or don't tell my son. That families also are concerned about the risk of seniors, and the media plays a role in that. But I really agree that we need to think about who makes the decision around what risk is taken, and the other piece to that is what in our society is making falls, for instance, happen. And sometimes it's around, there's individual things that we can do but it's often our environments where they don't clean the streets and they don't maintain them properly, and it's actually it's our society that's creating the risk and often, and so we need to look at that as well as making sure our older adults are prepared.
Well, it creates the risk, and then we say, but you don't want to fall, so you got to be careful and don't go out and don't do this. And all we do is perpetuate the problems, because when we tell people they shouldn't be doing, don't go out if it's icy, don't do this. People stop doing things, and when they stop doing things, then they're less able to do things, and then it just is a vicious cycle that people can't get out of.
And we're telling them on the other hand too, like, get out and get
Yes.
busy, like, you know, what are you sitting there in your chair watching TV all the
Yeah.
time? Go out, but be careful when you go out.
Yeah.
Don't do anything dangerous. Yeah.
Exactly.
The age group that we're centering this discussion on now is going to be different, say, 15 years from now. In other words, the people who are aging now grew up in a different time period than, for example, when we get to their age. I'm wondering if the expectations of the aging baby boomer generation who have grown up in that different economic climate than their parents or grandparents had, their expectations are going to be that much different. And how do we address them? Is that a valid concern?
Well, I think it is, Paula referred to that earlier, and what the technical term for that is a cohort effect, so that the people who are in their 90s lived through a different time, and the people who are in their 80s lived through a different time. And that, you know, there's lots of evidence that does make a difference in our experiences. I personally find it hard. I find it hard to predict what that will be, because we could say that, well, we've all had, you know, in general, the level of affluence has been higher, and so that might make a difference, but also maybe we haven't been as fit, and so that might make a difference, and we also have had, in a way, yeah, for me, it's hard to figure out, like, to really predict what that would be like.
Yeah, I agree with you, and just even the changes within the last 10 years that, you know, in technology and in, you know, being able to travel and around the world and see different cultures. I mean, I think you're right. I would be scared to try and predict what's going to happen, because I'm sure I'd be wrong, completely wrong about it.
The area of technology is interesting. I mean, there's this idea, some people talk about, yes, because boomers have had access to technology in a really different way than their parents, for instance, different kinds of technologies and rapidly changing, that they won't sort of be seen as a group later in their age that sort of has trouble with technology or has challenges. But there's also this whole other work that's being done that sort of says, what happens is when we leave the workforce, we lose touch with having to be hands-on in the cutting edge of technology. And so boomers are going to retire. In fact, they're retiring earlier than their parents in a lot of ways. And so they also will lose touch with that edge of technology. And so I also find it very difficult to think about predicting whether or not how different their group will be from their parents in that aspect anyways. And you know, we're living so much longer, which brings, you know, amazing opportunities, but also, especially in the old age groups, I think we can compare that sort of to the 70-year-olds, you know, so there's going to be similarities, there'll be overlaps that we can look back on, but it's really hard to see how things are going to change, to be ready
Yeah.
for anything.
Yeah, and with more and more people living older, there are, unless, you know, there's miraculous discoveries to, you know, cure Alzheimer's, or unless everybody suddenly gets rid of all their cardiovascular risk factors and we can stave off dementia for a long time, then among that means there will be that many more people who, at that older age, have, you know, fairly devastating problems, and that will have an impact for sure in our community.
Oh yeah, I think it impacts families certainly that are, you know, living with family members and helping to care for family members, and you know, I think about students coming up now and the types of careers that they're going to be moving into and that are going to be available for them, and a lot of it I think is going to deal with these issues that we can't necessarily predict very well, and so you don't even know how to direct students that you should be focusing on this, or you should be focusing on this, because it's hard to tell what, you know, 20 years down the road is going to be needed.
Yeah. I think your point, Lynn, about how training for the workforce and this idea of looking through all curriculum with an aging lens, I think would really benefit society in the future,
Mm-hmm.
right? So whether you're an architect planning buildings, or whether or not you're an accountant, or you work in banking, or you're going to be working in media, it is going to have an impact on your career. And so having that content in all
Mm-hmm.
course disciplines and infusing that as much as we can, I think would really benefit us moving forward.
Yeah, to me, that's been a very hard sell up until now. There's, in healthcare, you'd think it would be pretty obvious. Like, there's been all this evidence about these, people moving through the population, and there's some leaders in nursing in the States who have a phrase that care of older adults is the core business of healthcare currently. So you have to know this, and you have to think, if you're working as a social worker or as a nurse or OT or whatever, this is going to be the people, like, that's who's getting the most, who are getting the health care, or who are your core business. Not that we're not all receiving health care. And so you have to know these special things. There's a little bit of freaking out going on now in terms of that this is happening and we need to catch up, and I'm curious about the other fields that are outside of healthcare, whether there's that recognition. But I do think that there will be that motivation, as that's who your consumer base is, and that people will have to respond to it.
Oh, for sure. I mean, if you think about travel or a lot of recreation, so think about, you were talking about curling, so curling leagues or golf clubs or any type of social club, that's who is going to be a huge chunk of their business, and if they don't adapt to that group, they're going to be missing out on a lot of opportunities.
Mm-hmm. We used to get old and die, and gerontology rehab programs are like booming, and now we replace hips and knees and do all kinds of things. So yeah, I agree that we're going to have to keep up with all of that and make sure we're prepared in all sectors, not just in healthcare.
Yeah. You were talking about the training and the importance of, introducing education about, seniors and aging into no matter what field you're in. And I think that it's not just the education, but it's the experience as well. And I think certainly nursing has a lot of educational or experiential types of education opportunities. I think we're starting to see that more and more in other fields. And I know certainly in Kin, we're seeing that, where it's not just reading a book or reading a textbook or thinking about having a professor lecture at you about what it's like to age and what the special needs are, but it's getting out there and working with this population and finding out from them what they need and what they want.
I know an industrial designer called Glenn Hugan in Nova Scotia, who sends out his students to because that's going to be a huge market, sort of like design because design right now is ageist and ableist, and it's ridiculous. The wheelchair, for example, is a great example. It hasn't changed in 100 years, and it's because look who's designing for those. But he sends his students out, and they're finding. So they spend time with older adults and seniors in their homes. And then they observe and notice what they need. For example, one of the things the students found is they have a lot of pets, and bending down to fill up dog bowls and all. But rather than designing sort of an old version, they've done like this Umbra, really cool, funky design where it's like handheld with it's sort of the dish bowl and the food dish and the water bowl with a huge big fluorescent green arm. So you can actually, without bending down, lift it up onto the counter, feed, put the food and water, and then lift it down. And now, of course, it's not just seniors who want those. Everyone want to bend down and do it. And I think to me, that's a really exciting place to look, is design around adaptation. Yeah. We've talked about in design of long-term care facilities, and that I think ultimately we're trying to strive to design where younger people are like, oh, that's cool. I can't wait until I get old and get one of those, rather than having to wait.
But again, that just sort of breaks all the stereotypes of what, probably a lot of people say, well, if you're older, you wouldn't like something like that. That's for young people, and that's so far from the truth in my experience. What I've seen out there is, you say there's so many more similarities between all, across the lifespan than there are differences.
Yeah.
When you look at exercise, those stereotypes and being afraid, acting age appropriate has stopped a lot of people from exercising, and I'm sure engaging in a lot of other activities because it was seen as not age appropriate. And we're really starting to see a shift, and I think we need to continue to see a shift in that area, because I think it prevented, for a long time, it prevented people from doing things that perhaps they were really interested in doing and perhaps they really wanted to do, and then they thought, but should I be doing that? Should I be, my grandkids are doing that, it's not appropriate for me to be doing that. And you see that, clothing's a perfect example of that, I think.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of like the continuity of our what's meaningful to us in terms of activity and what our identities are. And so it's like, who wants to give up our identity as athlete or rock star or musician for this new identity called old when we reach 65?
Well, and nobody wants to. I mean, when you're growing up, you think, I'm never gonna get there, and then as we move closer to what we think of as old, we keep pushing it further and further. When you're 10, if someone's 40, they seem old, and then it gets later and later and later, because it's not an identity that we want, because it's not an identity that we value in at least in North American society very much. It's something that we fear, or it's something that we want to avoid, or at all costs. So I think there'll be a shift in that, for sure.
Hopefully, as long as, there's still media reports of, the sky is falling because of the aging population, and I'm not so personally so sure about that, and pegging older people as somehow dependent, when that's not true. Like, people still have an income, they have their, they worked, they have their savings, or they still are working, they are paying taxes still the same as everybody else. And so that doesn't mean that somehow everything's going to fall apart because of this.
You were talking about technology, and I'm always amazed at the number of people at the center, the number of our members, and they're more technologically savvy than I am, and they make a lot of them make a conscious effort. They don't want to fall behind the times. They don't, when their grandkids talk about, or their kids talk about, an iPad or email or things like that, they want to understand what people are talking about, and they don't want to seem like the world, and they don't want to feel like the world is leaving them behind. And when I was at that falls prevention talk yesterday, they were talking about, there was one group that was talking about a health passport that they had developed, and it was, sheets of paper that they could write down different things that could affect falls, so things like vision and medication and things like that, and they could keep track of factors specifically related to them. And when she was talking about when her students were developing this, they were talking about, should we make paper copies available to different places where people could pick it up, because we can't put it on, can't put it online because they're not going to be able to access it. And when the students went out in the community and talked about it, what they learned was that even if they don't, the vast majority of them had access to a computer and had email and could get it. And if they didn't, they were at least savvy enough to know how to get access to it. So whether it was, I need my, calling your granddaughter and saying, can you print this off and bring it to me? So even if they didn't have access to that technology themselves, or the knowledge of that technology themselves, they're able to maneuver around and get what they need out of it. So it's actually, I think the technology piece is going to be very interesting to see.
Well, look at the iPhone 6. So iPhones are getting bigger now,
Yeah.
and you know why they're getting bigger is because boomers need bigger text, and they need, the dexterity gets challenged. And I think, looking to business and private sector and industry, and they're often way ahead of, us working in academia, social services, healthcare. They're the ones, because they want to, use that
Get a big
market.
market.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
I was going to say money.
Yeah, for sure. That's where I look for, like, where the trends are going, and if kind of society's paying attention to that, and I think that they are in a lot of ways.
A fascinating discussion we've been having on aging in Niagara, and we're going to wrap it up by going around the table with some final thoughts on making a more age-friendly community here in Niagara. And we'll start with Kimberly this time.
Wow, that's a tough question. I guess in terms of making a more age-friendly community, there's sort of two things, and they maybe seem kind of opposing, but I don't think they are. We certainly have to have services and goods and products and opportunities that are for seniors and specifically meet their needs, because I mean every age group has their own specific needs. But I think we also need to find a way to integrate so that we're not isolating different groups of people. And so whether it's, formally bringing, getting seniors and students or young adults to work together, maybe that's one opportunity that can enrich everyone's life. But I think that that's definitely one way that we're going to have to go in the future.
Okay, to Lynn.
I think I have to come back to the hope of us doing a better job of education and continuing education in the workforce, and making people who are already in the workforce aware of what needs are, how they can adapt, and how they can provide services, how they can make better sidewalks, how they can do all of those things. That's where my hope is, that's what's going to make a difference for us.
And the last word this time around will go to Paula.
Number one, that idea about working across sectors. We need to have an age in all policy perspective. So when we're looking at transportation, housing, social environments, let's look at it through that lens so that we're preparing ourselves. Number two, we've talked today about intergenerational, and so continuing that through our education programs and our academic settings, to also making sure we create places and programs and policies that get different age groups working and working together. And then I think number three is just this idea about seeing seniors as assets, not just as liabilities, and that envisioning our communities from that perspective.
I'd like to thank all three of our guests who have been in the studio with us for this discussion. We've been speaking with Paula Gardner, Assistant Professor in the Department of Health Sciences, Lynn McCleary, Associate Professor in the Department of Nursing, and Kimberly Gammage, Associate Professor in the Department of Kinesiology. Thank all three of you for being in the studio with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.